And we welcome our Facebook viewers and our YouTube viewers where we go live. If you want to get this news fresh, I'm Andy Humm and I'm here with
Chris Cooper.
Chris, so good to have you. Thanks for coming.
Glad to be here, Andy.
How you feeling today?
I'm good. Happy to fill in for Anne so she gets some time off.
It does. Lots of news today, folks. And of course, we're going to talk at the top of the show about all the election stuff. I hope you're all planning to vote. And here we go.
Oh, the sweet sounds of New York City.
Hey, who's that? Who's that? That's Anne. We should have a picture of you up there.
Anne has undergone an incredible transformation.
What else is going on this week?
Oh, my goodness.
Busy?
Oh, it's, a lot going on this week.
Yeah.
Well, it's right before the elections. The madness is at its peak.
Right.
And we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
And I'm Chris Cooper, subbing for Ann Northrup this week.
Welcome, Chris, and happy Halloween. Will it be trick or treat on Election Day when all of our rights are on the line?
And President Biden is going to addresses controversies over transgender rights with trans TikTok star Dylan Mulvaney.
Yeah, we're going to bring you that video. House Republicans have put forth a federal Don't Say Gay bill.
Based on what Florida has already done, and Florida, not satisfied with that, moves to defund schools that treat LGBTQ students and teachers with dignity.
That's outrageous. Phobes in Michigan go after a middle school mural for incorporating a rainbow on a trans flag.
Meanwhile, a California baker won the right not to bake a wedding cake for a lesbian couple. Where have we heard this before?
How Christian. Kevin Spacey beat the rap, so to speak, for the third time.
We've got an update on LGBTQ history and the uprisings that got the movement started. This one from Los Angeles in 1959.
Yeah. Out actor Leslie Jordan of Will and Grace has died in an accident at the age of 67.
And a Russian appeals court continues to hold Brittney Griner, and her 9-year sentence got upheld, and she's going to get sent to a penal colony.
Terrible. Gay activist Peter Tatchell was arrested in Qatar protesting its human rights abuses ahead of the World Cup. And we don't know where he is as of this moment.
And in more really horrific news, trans activist Maria Nunez was deported from the U.S. and killed back home in Honduras.
Awful. New York City reports its first 2 deaths from MPV, the new term for monkeypox.
And someone named Andy will review the revival of Susie Laurie Park's Top Dog Underdog on Broadway. Who could that be?
That'll be all for this week. But we start with the elections. And, even in New York, look, we're all nervous about it. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. Is the polling right? Somebody told me to get off the polar coaster. But even in New York, we're concerned. Governor Hochul is there on the left, has been leading throughout. She's running in against an anti-gay congressman named Lee Zeldin, who's a totally MAGA, who has a rating of 7 out of 100 from the Human Rights Campaign. So look, folks, if you're thinking, oh, New York, I don't have to go vote, Democrats always win. It's not true. We need those votes up and down the line.
And what seems to be happening across the country is that the state of the economy and worries about crime have made people think, oh, well, we need to do something. We need to vote for someone different. And that's making them think about voting for people who they should never, ever, ever think about voting for, especially after the abortion ruling. If we have learned nothing from the abortion ruling, it should be that when we vote for these people, when we install these people in power, it has consequences. They approve judges, they put them in power, and those judges make decisions that affect our fundamental rights. So,
absolutely. And you're concerned about crime. You're going to give it to the party that won't do anything about gun regulations. I mean, come on.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that so much of what's going on with the economy and with crime is outside of any sort of levers of power that the people you're voting for have. So, it's just people thinking, oh, I've got to make a change so that we can fix these things. When they're not fixing anything, they're just digging a hole deeper for our rights.
Michael Moore, who predicted Trump would get elected, is predicting a blue tsunami in this country. He thinks there's a lot of strong hidden vote for Democrats because of the abortion decision, among others, and of course, all of the Trump crimes and things. So let's go back to Oregon again, because the out Democratic governor candidate, Tina Kotek, is doing better in the polls now as support for an independent named Betsy Johnson, not pictured there, drops. That's Christine Drazen, who's the Republican. So she's up in some, down 2 in others, but there's nothing to do but vote and to get out the vote of our friends, family, and allies.
It's a little bit crazy that Oregon could even be considering, electing a Republican governor, because they have such a record of electing progressive state governments. But because of the uniqueness of this situation with a third-party candidate who is drawing almost exclusively from the Democrats, and then a billionaire dumping his money into the race, first to support that third-party candidate, and now to support the Republican, who is completely anti-abortion. So it's crazy that she's gotten as far as she has. But that's really skewing the Oregon race. So we can only keep our fingers crossed, or more importantly, as Andy says, not leave it to chance, not cross fingers. Tell your friends and family in Oregon, vote, 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 vote.
Lots of close Senate races. We've told you about them. Georgia, Reverend Warnock's running against Herschel Walker. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Ohio. So the holding on to the Senate is still very possible if we vote.
Well, and then also let's just to talk about the House for a second. I've been looking at 2 different races that I find so interesting. One is Sean Patrick Maloney in the Hudson Valley, who backstabbed Mondaire Jones to take his district when he's supposed to be re-electing Democrats. That was his job. And now suddenly he's in a tight race. He's struggling. So that's a little bit of sort of karmic payback for that. Meanwhile, out on the West Coast in Palm Springs, where I spend a fair amount of time every year, there's a wonderful out gay Democrat who is challenging an entrenched, fossilized, 30 years in Congress, anti-gay, anti-abortion guy. But because of redistricting there, what's happened is Palm Springs, liberal, uber gay Palm Springs, is now in this guy's district. So this out gay person has a chance. His name is Will Rollins, and he has a chance to unseat that Republican. So I'm really fascinated by both of these races and how they'll turn out, particularly because Congress is really what's in peril here. The House of Representatives could very well flip to Republicans.
Right.
But if we can hold on to some of these seats.
If the Republicans win, get ready for a new McCarthy era. That would be Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And people like Marjorie Taylor Greene will end up, in power. I mean, demanding powerful positions, will want to impeach President Trump just for the hell of it in the House, even though that couldn't pass in the Senate. So anyway,
well, the message ultimately is vote, but voting is not enough. You've also got to get your friends and family to vote. We've got to be more engaged than just pulling the lever in the ballot box. And come after election night, let's lick our wounds / pat ourselves on the back, rest for a day, and then it's back at it for the next cycle, because that's going to be a big one.
And you're involved in something called Crimson Goes Blue, which started, I believe, in 2018 and did a good job of getting the House in order. What are your hopes there?
Crimson Goes Blue is basically, and this is something we hope other people will replicate. I'm a Harvard alum, And our reunion was coming up for my class right when Trump was going to be coming up for re-election. And a bunch of us turned to each other and we said, hey, look, so many people in our class want to make sure this guy does not win re-election. We should organize so that we're all doing the work. And we did it. And now, once we got, helped to get Trump out of office, we thought, we should keep doing this work of getting more Democrats elected. Hence the name Crimson, which is Harvard's color, goes blue for Democrats. But this is something, I so thoroughly encourage people to use your alumni networks, like-minded people to organize. It's more fun. It's effective. You can use your clout as alumni to try to get more Democrats elected and save us from the madness that has taken over the Republican Party.
Right. Okay. Well, let's shall we move on from politics? We kind of a significant interview for President Biden this week. He was on Now This, and he was being interviewed about trans rights by trans activist Dylan Mulvaney. And let's go to the videotape and show you what.
Mr. President, this is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process. Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming health care?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong. I think I was saying before we started that my deceased son, used to be the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He passed the broadest piece of legislation that he, as Attorney General, was able to convince the legislature and the governor to sign that dealt with all gender-affirming capability. I mean, there's a lot of, sometimes they try to block you from being able to access certain medicines, being able to access certain procedures, and so on. None of that should be available. I mean, no state should be able to do that, in my view. So I feel very, very strongly that you should have every single solitary right, including use of your gender identity bathrooms in public.
Thank you. Thank you. And it feels like Republicans have turned trans and non-binary people into this thing to blame society's downfall on in some ways. And this narrative is not only dangerous to our mental health, but also our physical safety. And particularly trans women of color are being murdered at an alarming rate.
More than any other group of people.
Thank you. How can Democratic leaders be more effective in advocating for us trans people and our families and our lives and our opportunities?
I'm not being facetious when I say this, being seen with people like you. No, I mean it. I genuinely mean it. People fear what they don't know. They fear what they don't know. And when people realize, individuals realize, oh, this is what they're telling me to be frightened of. This is the problem. People change their minds. People just don't know enough to know. And it's not because of intellectual incapability, it's just lack of exposure. And I think that it's really important that we continue to speak out about the basic fundamental rights of all human beings. And the idea that what's going on, in some states, I won't get into the politics of it, but in some states, it's outrageous, and I think it's immoral. The trans part's not immoral. What they're trying to do to trans persons is immoral.
Thank you. And do you have any messages to the families of trans folks that are seeking, options for their children, but are struggling to find resources? Do you have a message to those parents?
Yeah, I do. This is blood of your blood, bone of your bone. And it is, again, speaking to my son, when he spent a year in Iraq, and he was a decorated soldier. He volunteered to go. He had to give up the Attorney General's job and then came back to it. And he started a foundation I'm not allowed to talk about now because I can't raise money for it any longer. But it was for abused children. And one of the things he did, he's raised millions of dollars, this organization, to basically educate parents as to what they should not be afraid of, and to educate the community as to what is just pure hyperbole. And so I just think it's a matter of leaders speaking out and saying, as I told you, I mentioned a young woman who used to be in his staff, used to be in my staff, who is now a state senator. And she's trans, and she's a state senator in the state of Delaware, in an area that was historically very conservative, the part of Delaware. And she's running unopposed this time. So things are changing. Things are changing, but it's a matter of us acknowledging that there's nothing to be, just because it's different, there's nothing to be fearful about.
Wow.
That was remarkable. That the president of the United States is saying these things to a trans person. And you could see her face was just so enraptured that these words were coming from a person in the highest position in the land.
Since this is the hot issue in politics these days, I think it was very gutsy of the president to do this interview.
Well, and it's not just the interview. The administration has been pushing trans issues. For example, this week, the Social Security Administration made it easier for people to update their gender on their Social Security cards. And the records, without having to, provide any sort of surgical proof or anything like that. So.
Right. And staying on these trans issues, we talk about them a lot, but, a right-wing talking point is that trans youth who take hormones or do any kind of transitioning at all are filled with regret. But a new study published in The Lancet, highly regarded medical journal, found that 98% of adolescents who begin gender-affirming care continue that treatment through adulthood.
But, the right wing has found trans issues and child protection issues to be the wedge that they can use to try to roll back the clock for all of us, not just trans people, but also for gay people. And yes, they're having some success.
Yes, but judges have blocked laws banning gender-affirming care for minors in Alabama and Arizona, and the lawsuit against the one in Arkansas got underway this week. We also have a GLSEN study, the education group in our community. More than 80% of LGBTQ students feel unsafe at school. This isn't big news, but it's intensified. 68% specifically due to sexual orientation or gender identity, causing them to avoid after-school activities or social after-school functions. More than 32% missed a day of school, and 11% 4 or more days over, bullying over being LGBTQ. We got to fix this.
And part of that is, according to a Washington Post analysis, the fact that nearly half of students in this country are facing a wave of repression, of limiting what they can learn, of being targeted, and not just for being trans, but also for being gay. The restrictions on what you can learn about race and the history of racism in the United States. All of that is being pushed by the right wing as part of one slow-moving agenda. And they're having success because it is now up to 45 states that have proposed 283 laws over the past 3 academic years that would restrict what teachers can say.
Well, here's a fascism alert. The senior editor of something called The Federalist, the Federalist Society is the one that gives us all these right-wing judges on the Supreme Court, this guy, John Daniel Davidson, he says his side must stop calling themselves conservatives and be radicals, revolutionaries, and counter-revolutionists as they starve universities, make abortion murder, criminalize parents who let their kids go to drag time story hour, arrest doctors who engage in gender-affirming care, and prosecute teachers who expose students to sexually explicit material, which, of course, Ann and I did when we're AIDS educators at HMI. You can't teach about AIDS without talking about sex.
It's basically a manifesto for fascism, what this Federalist editor put forth. So, you're absolutely right. We have to be on guard. It is not something that's theoretical. It is something that is happening now.
And be appreciative that we've got an administration that's on our side. Our Pentagon now is going to provide travel funds and support for troops and their dependents who seek abortions. This was announced by the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. We have a picture of him there. Local commanders will not be allowed to influence whether service members get access to care or will have to face a culture of fear or repercussions for their choice. Now, the regulations go into effect by the end of the year. Under the Department of Defense, the healthcare services can only provide abortions in cases of rape or incest or when a mother's life is in danger, but that does not change. Under this regulation, the military is going to pay for the transportation, not for the abortion services themselves.
And you mentioned that this is the result of having an administration on our side. What we have to fear is not having the Congress on our side, which may indeed happen. And already, even before the Republicans possibly take control of Congress, they're proposing a national don't say gay law, modeled on what Florida has already done, but much more extensive and running much deeper. It's coming from Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana and 32 other Republican members of Congress. It's called the Stop the Sexualization of Children Act of 2022. And I just have to say, as a former comic book guy who still occasionally does some comic book work, this is so familiar. Because when I was working at Marvel Comics, I actually worked on the comic book that brought out Marvel's first openly gay superhero. He had been in the comics forever, but this brought him out of the closet. And I was, an assistant editor on that comic book, just basically Xeroxing. But that gave me a ringside seat to the whole process from beginning to end. And the problem was the same as what they're trying to resurrect now, that anything gay is inappropriate for children. And it's just not true. Well, I was a gay kid. We have tons of gay kids out there. We have gay parents. So it's simply not true. How you handle the subject matter, of course, that's going to be age appropriate. But they're trying to criminalize us in our entirety in regards to children.
This bill would ban any and all mention of gender to children under 10 in any federally funded facility or program and would reward anyone who files a complaint. So it's a vigilante bill. The bill says many sex ed curriculums encourage discussion of sexuality, sexual orientation, transgenderism, and gender ideology as early as kindergarten. And they teach masturbation, pornography, sexual acts, and gender transition. The bill calls drag queen story hours sexually oriented events. Ban sexually oriented material. Under this guideline, you couldn't take a kid to a play if a man and a woman kissed in it.
And here's the thing. The federal bill, some advocates say, would actually go further than Florida's measure because it would affect or extend outside the classroom to other institutions and programs and events that receive federal funding, not just classes or anything that takes place on federal property.
One of the 33 Republicans is from right here in New York City, Nicole Malliotakis, a closet case, who, when she voted against same-sex marriage in the state assembly, I regret that vote. But now she's ready to ban us entirely.
Well, fortunately, she has a challenger this election cycle. The guy who used to hold that seat, hopefully he will send her packing. But, it's Staten Island. Who knows? We'll see. It's kind of shocking that they're going after this. And what I don't understand is why he doesn't sort of turn this on its head and say, okay, if mention of sexual orientation is not allowed, then if someone says, here's a man and a woman who are going to get married, someone should sue them according to the law, or force them to be charged according to this law, because talking about a man and a woman getting married is talking about sexual orientation.
Of course. And staying in New York for a second there, Governor Kathy Hochul, who we mentioned at the top of the show, she's in this tight race. She signed a bill expanding social assistance to LGBTQ older people, clarifying that the Older Americans Act of 1965 includes consideration of barriers or isolation caused by racial or ethnic status, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or HIV status. And this requires the services to step up and address the greatest social need. And there's a tremendous need among LGBTQ older people.
What it does is it allows other factors besides just economic factors to be weighed in addition, because these other factors have classically disadvantaged people traditionally in society. And so they're hoping to bridge the gap of these people not typically looking for services.
And I want to reach out now to the 22 million of you who signed up to get student loan relief from the Biden administration. That has been paused because of a Republican lawsuit to stop it. So a judge put a pause on it. I don't think it's going to go all the way. I think it's going to be allowed. But remember who's on your side.
Elections have consequences when you vote for these people because you think, oh, somebody's got to do something about inflation. A, they probably can't do anything about inflation. But B, you're installing someone who's going to, nominate and approve judges like the guy who put the pause on your student relief. So think about these things. Think them through.
Well, let's and think about it when you vote in Florida where the anti-gay bully Ron DeSantis reigns. The Board of Education there, get this, passed 2 measures targeting the privacy, protection, and livelihood of LGBTQ students and teachers. It forces schools to notify parents if restrooms and locker rooms have not been separated by biological sex, a pushback against Biden's Department of Education Title IX guidelines that protect trans students. The other one threatens to revoke the licenses of K through 3 teachers who provide any lessons or discuss sexual orientation or gender identity, setting the stage for witch hunts and the children's hour in schools. Because, look, they're after us, but they're really after public education.
And what's interesting is that Joe Saunders of Equality Florida said that qualified, effective teachers are fleeing the profession in Florida thanks to the constant politicization of their roles and the discrediting of their characters by the DeSantis administration. So they're actually hemorrhaging teachers down there because of this stupidity and this nonsense.
Well, let's go to Michigan, where the war of the United States right on all these things, LGBTQ and education, came to the Grant Middle School.
And we begin tonight with the controversial painting by a Grant High School student. It's on a wall in the middle school building, and tonight some parents complained to the school board about its messages. 13 on Your Side's Nate Belt was at tonight's meeting and has details.
I put my art up there to make people feel welcomed.
That's how Grant High School student Evelyn Gonzalez describes this mural. She painted it inside the middle school's Teen Health Center, and parents are concerned about some of its content.
Now, this here is the mural in question that was a hot topic tonight at the school board meeting here at Grant Middle School. Now, some of the things that the parents were closely paying attention to included the trans flag on this t-shirt here, this symbol, which the artist says comes from a video game, as well as this symbol here, which she says is a Hispanic sign of protection.
I feel like she did a really good job finding excuses to defend the things she put on. None of us are that stupid.
Parents alleged the video game character is actually a depiction of Satan and that the hand symbol is demonic, with several even using the word witchcraft to describe it.
That's not what I'm a part of, and that's not what I'm trying to put out there.
As for the transgender flag, one parent implied it's a sickness.
When adults pretend things that are like real life, it's a mental illness. We need counselors. We need the medication that's going to help bipolar disorder fix their brains.
With another saying it's discriminatory against Christian beliefs.
We and our administration should embrace that and get all of this hate material out of our schools, because it is hate material.
Not everybody was opposed to the mural. One parent was appalled by some of the words used.
I am a conservative, right-wing, gun-loving American, but I have never seen more bigoted people in my life.
And wants to see more acceptance in her community.
We have an array of people in this little town, and I'll be the first one to support our Christian families, but we're not the only ones here.
A student and friend of the artists who described themselves as queer says they were bullied throughout middle school and into high school. They say the mural makes them feel included.
Maybe you should be more concerned with your children's behaviors instead of what art is on the wall.
While some parents called for the mural to be removed or altered, Grant Public Schools handbook includes a non-discriminatory policy, saying in part, any form of discrimination or harassment can be devastating to an individual's academic progress, social relationship, and or personal sense of self-worth. No decision was made on the future of the mural at Monday's meeting. In Grant, Nate Belt, 13 on your side.
So a couple of things. Number one, newsflash, bipolar disorder is different than gender dysphoria. Medication for bipolar disorder isn't going to help. And number two, my favorite quote from the person who was protesting when they said, "We're just not that stupid."
Well, I'll tell you, and the woman who said fix our brains. And it was good to see some people standing up for us, and they were terrific. But how long is this war going to go on?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, the Heritage Foundation, the right-wing group, it's been around forever. They're now pushing a new bill called the Given Name Act, requiring public education employees and contractors to use the name on a student's birth certificate or a derivative thereof, unless a parent or guardian approves the name in writing. And the same goes for pronoun. Even if the parent approves of the kid's chosen name and pronouns, teachers who refuse to go along with that on pronouns for religious or moral reasons don't have to. So parental rights are only sacred to the Republicans when parents agree with the religious right. Under the proposal, any school district that violates the law would lose state funds and contracts. So much for free speech.
And I think we left Florida a little too quickly. And Andy, stop me if you guys covered this last week. I've tried to keep track of everything you guys covered. A Trump judge has said that the Don't Say Gay law that we were talking about in Florida is going to stay. They're not going to pause it because, the objection to it was that bullying had increased, or one of the objections was that bullying had increased since this law was put into effect. And the Trump-appointed judge said that, but bullying is a fact of life. It's just something students will have to face, the criticism and harsh judgment of their peers.
Yeah, these judges are trying to say all the issues we're raising about not being able for a parent to be out or come to a school function, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's not covered under this bill. So you don't have anything to worry about. But I mean, my God, it sent a horrible signal to the schools.
And these things are actually happening, that they are saying, the schools in their excess of caution and not knowing how to apply this law are doing things like not declaring National Pride Month as they did previously, because they're terrified about this law.
Well, I mean, anyway. Ann and I were in the schools for many years. Teachers were always a little nervous about having us back in the 80s to talk about AIDS and homosexuality and things like that. But they did it because there was an AIDS crisis on, and they did want to de-isolate LGBTQ youth. But those issues in New York were extremely controversial, but that's almost, that's 35 years ago.
Yeah, but it's coming back. That's the thing.
It's come back. Well, and Kevin Spacey's come back.
Well, before we get to Kevin Spacey, we should talk about how the Missouri Secretary of State, Jay Ashcroft, has proposed that to defund state libraries that give kids, quote unquote, non-age appropriate materials. So in other words, they're going to take the funding away from libraries if they have any sort of material that someone somewhere deems is inappropriate.
That's insane. And kids, if you're listening, you can find most of this stuff on the internet and they can't stop you. So let's go to Kevin Spacey. You read that he was cleared in a lawsuit brought by Anthony Rapp. Anthony sued him for $40 million for something that happened. Anthony's 50 now, what happened when he was 14 years old. But in the end, the only charge left in the suit was battery for an incident that took place in 1986. And Spacey was 26 at the time. Rapp alleged that Spacey picked him up, put him on a bed, lay on top of him. That was the allegation that virtually ended Spacey's acting career. But Spacey put on a very effective performance on the stand, denying the charges, saying his publicist pushed him into apologizing. Spacey's lawyers and a psychiatrist that they hired poked holes in Rapp's contention that he was traumatized for life by this. They raised issues about the play Anthony was in back then when a man playing his dad drunkenly gets on top of him. So even though another accuser testified about Spacey groping him at 27 in 1981, this was the second charge against Spacey that did not stick. He faces 4 charges of sexual assault in London, and 30 others have accused him of harassment. But he's a good actor, and he's got good lawyers.
And in this specific trial, another actor got drawn in, John Barrowman, who you may, for those of you who follow Doctor Who, he played Captain Jack Harkness, a bisexual character on that, and I believe he's bisexual or maybe just gay in real life. And he testified, and actually his testimony undercut what Rapp said, because Rapp didn't remember being in the same hotel room with Barrowman and Spacey, and Barrowman said, yeah, actually that did happen. So it's a big celebrity mess. It took the jury less than an hour to rule in Spacey's favor that Anthony Rapp had not proven his case. So,
well, when it's a 36-year-old charge, it's tough. Spacey did have to pay $31 million to Netflix, although he's suing about that, where he starred in House of Cards for breach of contract due to all the harassment that he subjected to men to there. Anthony Rapp issued a statement. I'm grateful for the opportunity to put this case before a jury. It's always been about shining a light in part of the larger movement to stand up against all forms of sexual violence. And as I said, his coming forward did put an end to Spacey's career.
Meanwhile, another courtroom drama unfolded in Miami. You may remember the case from 2018 when 4 men beat a gay couple at Miami Gay Pride because one of them, as he was walking out of the men's room, brushed against one of the 4 guys, and they took that as an opportunity to give them a beat down. That was in 2018. Well, now, finally, these men have arrived at a plea deal, the 4 defendants. And so Juan Carlos Lopez, Luis Alonso, Adonis Diaz, and Pablo Figueroa are not getting any jail time, but they will have to do 2 hours of community service, and they received 5 years of probation, and they had to provide an apology in the courtroom while Renee Chalarka and Dmitry Loganov, who were the 2 victims, were sitting there in the courtroom. So that's how that case, after 4 years, was finally resolved.
Wheels of justice move too slowly. Last week, a little history thing here. We told you about the Black Night Brawl in Milwaukee, a gay bar uprising in 1961. And we said it was listed as the first gay uprising in the country, well before Stonewall. But a viewer wrote, our viewer Omar, telling us about an earlier one. Cooper's Donuts in Los Angeles in 1959.
Yes. Cooper Donuts, yes.
Well, this was a shop that was between 2 gay bars, and the cops used to harass the patrons. And in this case, they were attempting to arrest 2 drag queens, 2 male sex workers, and a young man cruising for a date. One was John Recchi, who wrote City of Night, a breakthrough gay book, in 1963. But one of the arrestees protested the lack of room in the squad car for all 5 of them, and the onlookers started to throw things, coffee, donuts, cups, trash at the cops, and the cops fled in their car without making any arrests. And the patrons celebrated in the streets and rioted. The police came back, beat up and arrested several people. Recchi escaped. And Harry Hay, who founded the Mattachine Society in 1950, said this was the first revolt against police treatment of LGBTQ people ever. Though it is noted anyone who was openly gay back then risked arrest and imprisonment.
So after that inspiring story, I don't want to bring everybody down, but I feel like we have to really sort of quickly hopscotch a lot of really bad trans news from coast to coast. Let's start with Ted Cruz, who put the name and school of a trans preschool teacher on Twitter, retweeting someone else, some other right-wingers' tweet, and that exposed that trans teacher's name and school to 5.3 million followers on Ted Cruz's Twitter feed. Then in Pittsburgh, radio stations in Pittsburgh have been airing anti-trans hate ads. They've been sponsored by something called the America First Legal Foundation. That's who paid for it. And these radio stations, 8 of them so far in the Pittsburgh area, have been running them. Activists there have been fighting hard to try to sue CARE. An activist, local activist there, has been fighting hard to get them to stop doing it. And in fact, some of the local DJs have refused to go on the air until those ads have been pulled. Then moving on to Michigan, there's a Christian medical provider. She's suing. Her name is Valerie Klosterman, and she's suing so that she won't have to provide care to trans people, and so that she can continue to misgender them because, hey, it's her religious belief. And then heading over to Eugene, Oregon, where the usual gaggle of extremists decided they had to attack Old Nick's Pub, where a drag queen storytime brunch was in progress, and they surrounded it. They tried to push their way in. They were pushed back by supporters inside, and it just turned into a violent mess. But Nick's Pub Old Nick's Pub says it's going to continue to have drag queen storytime brunch despite all of this.
And a bunch of those Proud Boy types showed up at a Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez town meeting that she was trying to have and started screaming anti-gay slurs at her. She's not a lesbian, but she's a big ally of the community. I worry about violence. All right.
Should we talk about the Christian Baker who won their case?
Yes, we should. Yes,
so a judge ruled that a Christian baker is allowed to refuse to sell their cake to a lesbian couple that was seeking a wedding cake. This was Tastetree's bakery owner, Kathy Miller. And the judge ruled, despite California's UNRRA Civil Rights Act.
UNRRA,
sorry.
That's all right.
Civil Rights Act. That Miller's only motivation at all times was to act consistent with her sincere Christian beliefs, and that therefore this was okay. Now, that may sound great and grand, but what you have to think through is that just because they're religious beliefs doesn't mean they're not bigoted. And the whole point of these anti-discrimination laws is to make sure that private bigotries are not carried into the public sphere of public accommodations.
And it will apply to other categories that are protected, race, sex, all these categories. They can just say, my religion says that Black people are inferior, women are second-class citizens, I don't have to treat them the same. That's my religion.
Exactly. Now, this decision comes after a Supreme Court decision that already upheld one other baker's right to have a religious liberty exemption, but that was decided on very narrow grounds because they said there was a legislative history, a judicial record of bias in the development of the original ruling. So the Supreme Court hasn't ruled broadly on this yet, but they may get the chance.
They're hearing a case in December about a web designer who doesn't want to design for gay weddings, even though she doesn't even design weddings at this point. That's ridiculous. All right, a better story. We have the first out gay college football player at an HBCU, a historically Black college or university. He is Byron Perkins, a defensive back for the Hampton University Pirates. Says he was in a low mood and realized he needed to prioritize what makes him happy, and said, authenticity is everything to me. He says the response from his teammates and coaches has been very good, a little mixed in some cases, some based on religion, but he says he is gay and religious and loves Christ.
Hey, whatever works for you. Glad you're out. Thank you so much. Okay. Are we ready to talk about some obituaries? I guess The big one is
Leslie Jordan.
Leslie Jordan, thank you.
The out actor and comic. He became famous, of course, on Will and Grace, Hearts of Fire, many other shows. He's died at the age of 67 in an auto crash after suffering some kind of medical emergency. He also became a social media sensation during the pandemic, 5.8 million followers, as he battled lockdown boredom with humor, openly gay, open about his struggle with drugs and alcohol, sober since 1997, a gay icon for sure.
And meanwhile, the pro-LGBTQ Obama Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, died at age 68, and he was the one who presided over the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the lifting of the ban on transgender people in the military. So he was a big defender of ours in the Defense Department.
And the Broadway choreographer and director Chet Walker has died at 68. Tony nominated for the revival of Pippin, conceived the Tony-winning show Fosse, about Fosse choreography in 1999. He worked all over the world: Sweet Charity, La Cage aux Folles, started as a performer in such shows as On the Town, Pajama Game, Pippin, Dancin' and Sweet Charity. Survived by his husband, Jack, and a daughter, Charlie, was the artistic director of Walker Dance, a nonprofit jazz dance company. All these guys gone too soon. All right, international news.
Well, the big international news is Brittney Griner and her appeal of her 9-year prison sentence getting denied by the Russian court. No surprise there, but considering what we've been hearing about Brittney Griner's mental state, it's got to be a blow.
Right. She's going to be sent to a penal colony. The U.S. is out there with a prisoner exchange proposal, but no response from the Russians, who are busy slaughtering civilians, men, women, and children in Ukraine. She's going to get a slight reduction in sentence for time served, but 9 years is basically what she's serving. In Qatar, the World Cup is coming up, and we've got reports already that there are human rights abuses there, gay LGBTQ rights abuses that are ongoing. So Peter Tatchell, the UK activist, traveled to Qatar to protest, and here's what he had to say.
It's really important that in the run-up to the World Cup, Qatar's human rights abuses are put out there on the world stage for everyone to see. Qatar is a serial human rights abusing regime. It abuses the human rights of LGBT plus people, women, migrant workers, and liberal Qataris. We must not allow Qatar to secure a PR victory in this World Cup season.
Well, and Peter Tatchell was standing in Qatar with his sign protesting when he got snagged by the cops and arrested, and no one knows where he is right now. So we will keep you updated on what goes on with that.
I'm sorry, has he been found?
No. They did. There's, as far as I know, last I checked, no one knew where he was at the moment.
Well, the Qatari head of security said rainbow flags could be taken off attendees at the World Cup to protect them from being attacked for promoting gay rights. Well, this is totally against, they shouldn't be having these tournaments in places like this.
Well, staying in the Muslim world, in Afghanistan, the Taliban murdered a gay medical student and then sent a video of his death to his family and his bereaved partner. The murdered man was named Hamed Zabori, 22 years old. He was kidnapped in August at a Taliban checkpoint in Kabul. And then he was tortured for, I believe, 3 days, and then finally shot in the back of the head.
And brace yourselves in Italy. They have indeed installed Giorgia Meloni, 45 years old, as the prime minister, leading a coalition of far-right parties, including our own Brothers of Italy party with neo-fascist roots, which only got 26% of the vote, but the right wing got the most votes. Her governing partners are longtime admirers of Putin, though she says she will, back the Ukraine and its defense against Russian brutality. Meloni has approached ultra-conservative Catholic Eugenia Maria Roccella to be Minister for Family, Birth Rates, and Equal Opportunities. This Ms. Roccella in 2018 pledged to work against Italy's law legalizing same-sex civil unions, calling same-sex marriage the end of humanity. That's who's running Italy now.
The fascist impulse is rising, not just here in the States, but throughout Western democracies, and it's scary. You got to be vigilant. You got to fight. Good news from Mexico. I know Ann and Andy do these stories periodically about yet another Mexican state that has legalized marriage equality. We're getting there. This is the 29th of 32 states, the largest, most populous state in Mexico. The state of Mexico has legalized same-sex marriage. So that leaves only 3 states left to go before marriage equality is legal throughout Mexico.
But staying in Central America, in Honduras, trans activist and influencer Melissa Nunez, 42 years old, who was deported from the United States in July, was fatally shot back home in Monticello by a group of hooded individuals as she left a friend's house. She had been living in Miami, but when she traveled home to Honduras in December and returned to Miami, we deported her. Nunez was a popular TikTok user with more than 20,000 followers. She's the 34th LGBTQ person killed in Honduras this year, a nation of only 10 million. 434 killed since 2009, 131 of them transgender.
That's all the international news I have.
Well, I just think we should, Britain has its first person of color, first Hindu as prime minister, and he used to be
very wealthy guy.
Goldman Sachs executive also has, he's got $800 million with his wife's money as well. But I mean, the point is, he was open to transgender rights, affirming them. And then when he ran for office like this, for the high office, he started saying things like, well, trans women sort of aren't real women. And it's just outrageous. All right. Okay, AIDS news. Our friends at Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS sent $250,000 in emergency grants to 5 food banks in Florida. Broadway Cares has a history of timely grants and crises, and we appreciate the annual support they give us here at Gay USA. If you go to a Broadway show, by the way, now, you will be there with their Red Bucket Brigade taking your donations. And at this time of year, of course, we will just remind you, if you would like to make a tax-deductible direct donation to Gay USA, go to our website at gayusatv.org, help us out so that we can keep going.
And Andy, tell me about this monkeypox virus, which I did not even know it. They changed it.
Well, all I know is that the first 2 deaths in the city from what we're now supposed to call MPV have been recorded in New York. There have been 4 nationwide. New York City has seen 3,695 cases of MPV. 143,000 people have gotten the vaccine and second doses administered. Walk-in appointments are available. Cases have fallen dramatically due to vaccinations and behavioral change. So if you haven't gotten your shots yet, and get your COVID booster as well. All right. And take a sip. Okay. Entertainment news. Let's start with what's going on with Chris Cooper.
Oh, what's going on with me? I have a book coming out. Yay. I wrote a memoir for Random House. It is about the collision of a life lived birding with being gay, with being black, with being a complete and utter nerd, and how all these things wove together over my just shy of 60 years of life. So it was very hard to write. It was like taking off your clothes in public.
Well, Harvey Fierstein, and he has a terrific memoir out as well. But he said when you sit down to write it, the things that come back at you are the bad things that happened in life. Did that happen to you when you were writing it?
No, actually. One of my favorite chapters is my chapter when I go back to Marvel Comics and just remembering my time there and what a joy it was and how much fun. I tried to communicate that on the page. So anyway, the memoir won't be out for a while. It's not coming out until spring of 2023. So I will let you guys know when it is actually about to hit. And then
we'll have you on as a guest or maybe as a co-host.
That would be fab. And then the other thing that's happening is I will be hosting a birding show for National Geographic Wild channel, which is a cable channel. 6 episodes. That'll be in early 2023 as well. And it'll also be streamable if you have Disney Plus.
And what was that experience like doing that kind of television?
It was fun. I have to say, being on Gay USA, periodically had sort of prepared me. So I have to thank you, Andy, and also Anne for giving me the chance to stretch my wings a little bit. But it was, so to speak. But it was just so much fun going to all these fabulous places and seeing fabulous birds. I mean, what's not to like when you're a birder? So that was.
You traveled quite a bit for it.
Yeah, we went to Puerto Rico, we went to Hawaii, we went to Alabama, and Alabama was something. Let me tell you about that. So that was this was an experience. Yeah.
And you have lived to tell the tale. Okay.
I have lived to tell the tale.
Well,
but we do have other entertainment news. We have the real, and Anne should really be the one to talk about this. The Real Housewives of New York City have its first openly queer housewife. She loves that reality stuff. And so Jenna Long will make history as the first openly LGBTQ plus housewife on the Real Housewives of New York City. They have had one other housewife previously, on a different Housewives spinoff.
Okay. A couple of Broadway show reminders. Take Me Out, the gay baseball play by Richard Greenberg, without Tony winner Jesse Tyler Ferguson, resumes on Broadway October 27th. It also won the best revival of a play and also stars Jesse Williams as a gay baseball star. And we didn't get to cover this, but Jill Sobule of I Kissed a Girl, did I say her name right? I Kissed a Girl fame, the song, is doing a one-woman show, and I can't actually say the title. It's basically F 7th grade at the Wild Project in the East Village, and it's there through November 8th. But I did see Top Dog Underdog. Now, this is from 20 years ago by Susie Laurie Parks. Won the Pulitzer Prize in 2002. I didn't see it back then off Broadway. Now on Broadway, it's open to raves. It's a two-hander. That's Yava Abdul Malvin on the left and Corey Hawkins on the right. They're playing down, but not quite out brothers named Lincoln and Booth. Get it? Just as Edward Albee said, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, with the leads George and Martha, was about the ideals of the American Revolution being dead. This, to me, while set inside a rundown flat, is about how we really lost the Civil War and the promise of Reconstruction, starting when Abraham Lincoln was shot. It's an often funny and ultimately harrowing story of the two brothers, where three-card Monte plays a central role, a street gambling game where we can't win, much like the game being played by Republicans today as they dismantle democracy. And most of us either just watch or aid in the scam.
And Andy, is there a place where we can read your review?
You just heard it. I mean, I didn't write more than that. I do recommend it. Top Dog Underdog. Next week I'll have a review of Gabriel Byrne's one-man show called Walking with Ghosts, but it hasn't opened, so I'm not supposed to talk about it yet. It hasn't officially opened.
Is there anything?
We've got about 2.5 minutes here, Chris. So let's once again rev up the vote.
Yes, no, absolutely. Look, like I said before, I every time I come in here, I feel like a broken record, but I'm always saying, when you vote, remember that party affiliation matters. And now more than ever, now that the Republican Party has driven off a cliff of insanity and denial and fact-free life.
Well, just think about it. If the Republicans do take back the House, think about who's going to be heading the committees. You're not going to have Jerry Nadler heading the Judiciary Committee and civil rights issues. It's going to be Jim Jordan. I mean, that maniac from Ohio.
And not just who's going to be heading the committees, but the pressure that's going to be on the various Republican committee heads and the speaker from that crazy out there faction, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Boeberts, who are going to be like, this is our time to shine. And
well, it doesn't look like, Green is in a race where, even though she's so horrible, it probably can't lose. Although there is an alternative there, and he's got a lot of money. Flowers, right? And Mr. Flowers. But in Colorado, Boebert's got a race out there in Colorado. They're getting a little sick of her. And it would be great to get rid of some of these extremists. But of course, there are so many extremists on the ballot this time. I mean, this is why people like Liz Cheney are saying, I can't vote for I wouldn't be able to vote for a lot of these Republicans. They've essentially left the party. But there you are. That's what's happened.
Well, it's our job to get engaged, and not just with voting, but with activism and electoral activism. We've got to knock on doors, we've got to make the phone calls, we've got to send the postcards. It's that kind and send the money if you've got it. That kind of retail activism is what wins elections.
Right. It's mainly getting out and voting and not leaving it to someone else. I mean, or thinking that it's gonna happen if you don't. And there are so many opportunities to vote, so many early opportunities to vote. Many of you are doing it. If you haven't done it already, get in there and do it. So that now, and we come on next week. We're going to be taping on Tuesday, so we're not going to know a lot of the results of the elections, but we will do all the analysis the following week, and Ann will be back. And thank you, Chris, for being with us this week.
My pleasure, Andy.
Down to our last 15 seconds. And thank you out there in TV land for watching and staying with us and paying such close attention. We appreciate it.
Bye.
Okay,